Hello and welcome to Talking T20, ESPN Cricinfo's brand new podcast which takes you into the heart of the game that's reshaping cricket. So far as T20 debuts go, this seems to be as good a time as any for us to make ours with the IPL just around the corner. I'm Srinath Sripath, your host, and every episode I'll be joined by some of the finest minds, analysts, writers and commentators from around the T20 cricketing world to discuss one specific aspect related to the shortest format of the game and delve in depth into it. Today's topic, of course, is bowling at the death or death bowling, and joining me are two well-known names on the T20 circuit. Gaurav Sundararaman, who's been an auction table strategist, an analyst for teams, and someone who's been a T20 insider for a number of years now. Hello Gaurav, welcome to the show.
Hi, good to be here.
Also joining us is a familiar name, a podcaster, documentary filmmaker, and ESPN Cricinfo's global writer. Someone who these days always seems to be on the lookout for the next big thing in T20 data and analytics. Jarrod, Kimber, welcome to the show.
How you doing?
Doing well, and we'll head straight into the show then. The first thing I want to present to you is a hypothetical scenario. We are going to be talking death bowlers on our first episode. It's a hypothetical scenario for both of you, which will help us dive right into the topic. Royal Challengers Bangalore, an IPL side who've been up and down, are in an IPL final. And they have AB de Villiers and Virat Kohli at the crease. There's 2 overs left in their chase and there's 20 runs to get. It's a big knockout game. It's an IPL final. And both of you have 2 current bowlers from anywhere in the world without any restrictions to choose from who will help you defend this total.
Obviously, you would lose more often than you would win in that scenario. But I think I would be, because of the quality of the batsmen, I would look for bowlers of equal quality. And I suppose at the moment, you'd be looking at Mitchell Starc and Rashid Khan. Mitchell Starc's recent death bowling figures aren't as good just because he hasn't played as much T20 cricket. But when he does play a lot of T20 cricket, he's basically the best bowler in the world. Rashid Khan doesn't take as many wickets as some of the other really good death bowlers. But even though you need to take wickets to get through Kohli and de Villiers, you certainly, with Rashid Khan, he's going to go at such a low run rate that trying to score off him is when you usually do lose your wickets off him. So I would be going for those 2, although I would always back AB de Villiers.
Most of us would, isn't it? So 2 aspects involved here. Do you pick up wickets or do you restrict the flow of runs? Which of these do you think Jarrod is overrated?
In general, I think taking wickets in the death is massively overrated. I think there's a lot of bowlers around the world who get a lot of contracts based on the fact that they have good figures, and a lot of their wickets are at the death when they don't mean much. We know that roughly a wicket in the first over is worth 12 runs, and a wicket in the last over is worth roughly 2 runs. So we know that there's a huge difference depending on when you take a wicket in a T20 game to what the overall total is going to be. But in this specific situation, obviously wickets are incredibly important, and you still want bowlers who are very good. I think the Gaurav might know this off the top of his head, but I think the average strike rate at the death in the worldwide over the last couple of years is about a wicket every 11 balls or maybe every 12 balls. So, we see a lot more wickets there than we do at any other point in a T20 game.
In terms of taking wickets is not that important, but sometimes it depends on who's the batsman as well, and who's the batsman who's going to come in next. If a batsman is not able to hit sixes and he's the next batsman in, it's always better to take a wicket of an AB de Villiers or a Carlos Brathwaite or anybody for that matter. But in case if the batsman who's coming in is also a guy who can hit sixes, then I rather look to contain, and a dot ball or even a single is worth much more. Jarrod is right in that way. In the death overs, a lot of bowlers do take a lot of wickets, and their stats are obviously it shows that the bowler is much better. But again, it's about variations. It's about bowling those dot balls and those executing those yorkers.
And in this case, let's face it, either of these guys can take the team home. AB or Virat staying at the crease will take them home. Having said this, who are your 2 picks for this?
Considering it's an IPL team, and I would go with Chris Morris and Bhuvaneshwar Kumar, purely because Morris does not concede a 6 easily. He concedes just 1 6 in 2 games. If you look at death overs, that's 1 every 24 balls. So I'm assuming he bowls 2 death overs, so that's 2 games. So I need a player who can prevent those sixes from coming. which is why I go with Chris Morris, and obviously Bhuvaneshwar Kumar for executing those wide outside off-stump yorkers. He's extremely good at that, and I think he's my man for ABD and Virat.
Interesting. So Bhuvneshwar Kumar and Morris. Not somebody like Bumrah, who's highly rated at the death?
No, not really. Sometimes Bumrah, what he does is he does look good for Mumbai because not many people tend to attack him. They try to play him out and they look to attack the other end, and which is why a guy like Mitchell McClennan used to get a lot of wickets. So Bumrah is someone whom you would generally like to play out, and which is why the stats show that he's really good. But I think even Steve Smith hit him for the six in the final last year. So if good batsmen are there, then they look to attack him. Maybe Bumrah may not be the force he is currently.
Well, Bumrah is really interesting because his bowling average, I think, in the death over the last 3 years, I think these numbers are. Yeah, last 3 years of the IPL, his bowling average at the death is 29, and he's taking a wicket every 18 balls, so well above the average. So if you are looking to strike, Bumrah is not a particularly good death bowler. As far as run rate goes, he's better, but he's still actually above the average. So there has been a lot of talk about him, and he certainly. I can see why people think he's a very good death bowler, but his numbers don't really show that he's one of the world's best death bowlers. If you look at the numbers, there are certainly a lot more bowlers that you'd prefer to bowl in the death than you would Bumrah. Like someone like Tyler Mills, who struggled in his last IPL season and really struggled in his last Big Bash season, is actually still, even with those two poorer seasons behind him, still one of the world's best death bowlers. And you'd certainly bowl Mills ahead of Bumrah in a situation like this. I think Mills has something like the 7th best economy rate worldwide at the death, and has been an incredible bowler. And yet Bumrah has got a lot more hype. And I think part of these reasons is just that there's a lot of we still are not looking at players as specialist type players, and a lot of the problems that Mills has had, for instance, has been in the other part of the innings, and a lot of the success that Bumrah has had has been in other parts of the innings.
Just to add to Jarrod, one interesting thing is about spinners bowling the death. Not many captains have the interest of bowling spinners in the death unless they're like really good. Maybe Sunil Narayan is the only example which I can think of where he was used consistently in the death. So a bowler like Rashid Khan, for example, sometimes the bowlers tend to play the reputation of the batsman. So with a guy like ABD, Rashid Khan, you never know how the mental aspect of the game works in those situations, which is why captains are hesitant to bowl spinners. But it would be great to see that trend building up in the next couple of years, where you just give the ball to Rashid and ask him to keep it less than 10 runs and over, when he does it normally at ease in the middle overs. So I would like to see that trend increasing though.
No, all these bowlers that we've discussed so far, they've all gone for big money in the IPL and elsewhere. The picks that both you and Jarrod have given, the combination of Rashid Khan and Chris Morris is collectively the most economical pair in all the major T20 leagues since 2015. Rashid goes at an incredible economy rate of 6, which is way higher than the next best, which is Morris at 7.08. Jarrod, just coming back to you on Rashid Khan. Gaurav made an interesting point about captains not preferring to bowl spinners at the death for specific reasons, whatever it is. There's a traditional mindset in cricket which dictates that slower bowlers tend to get hit a lot more. What makes Rashid Khan so special? Would you call him the death bowling unicorn T20s going around right now?
Well, him and Mitchell Starc, as I said, I think are the best two T20 bowlers in the world. And Mitchell Starc and Rashid Khan might even be two of the best bowlers in the world, bar none, but certainly at T20 cricket. So I think you'll find when you look at the list that there's a couple of bowlers that stick out. Maybe someone like Tymal Mills and a few others that stick out as death bowling specialists. Actually, most bowlers who are very good at in the death are actually the best bowlers altogether, and that's what Rashid Khan is. When you talk about Rashid Khan or Sundararaman bowling at the death, the reason they bowl at the death is because they're virtually impossible to hit without losing your wicket, because you can't pick the spin that they're bowling at quite often. You're not sure which way they're spinning it. They're bowling it at really good pace. They're both quite accurate. They're both very clever bowlers. But the more interesting thing for me is what you were talking about before, the traditional mindset of cricket. I know I wrote a piece, I think it was for last year, about the data that just says how great spinners are when they open the bowling in the power play. And I was contacted by all these coaches telling me it was rubbish, despite the fact that the record had already shown how good they'd been. And there was a couple of coaches who actually contacted me and then said, but what are they like in the death? And the truth is that I think this is since 2014, a minimum of 35 overs at the death. the best bowling economies is Rashid Khan, Sundararaman, Jeetan Patel, and Syed Ajmal. So the top 4 bowlers for the lowest economies are all spinners. Now, they're all very good bowlers, and they're bowled in different conditions and, different competitions and so forth. But it actually tells you that there is a reason for certain spinners to bowl at the death. The same reason that we have seen over the last couple of years that there's a reason for certain spinners to bowl in the power play. So with Rashid Khan, there's no bad time to bowl Rashid Khan. That's not the case with all spinners, obviously. There's a lot of spinners you would not want to bowl in the death. But certainly they're really successful. And Rashid Khan is, he is a unicorn. I think that is true about almost every aspect of his cricket.
Yeah, and that brings us to another sort of point that keeps getting bandied about cricket being a batsman's game largely. If you look at the last 3-4 years in T20 leagues and in general the value of bowlers, a lot of drafts and auctions have tended to prioritize these death bowlers, guys who are really good at defending. It's an analogy that I want to make. I might be completely off the mark here. In football, there's an increasing realization that centre-backs are generally scarce, and therefore teams are realizing their importance and willing to shell out the big bucks for these guys. So traditionally, moving on from just paying overboard and paying a lot of money for batsmen, teams have started retaining and paying and picking all these guys first up in their drafts and auctions. Gaurav, is that a trend that you're seeing a lot more in recent years as T20 has become a lot more scientific and teams have started realizing?
Yes, definitely that the fact that death overs is a specific skill, and those are the phases in the game where the match is generally lost. And especially when you look at most teams looking to chase nowadays in T20s, win the toss, chase, and look to have 50 runs in the last 5 overs. So that's the kind of skills you need as a bowler. You need to be able to defend 50 runs in 5 overs. And the conundrum of whether to bowl the 19th or the 20th, all these things tend to happen in most T20 games nowadays. So you look for players who can deliver at that point in time, irrespective of the target, irrespective of the score. So that's why I guess, and the number of bowlers who do that are very less, and it's a skill which you need to practice. And I guess that's why they are more than demand. And considering people don't play too much of these bowlers, you see, they don't play too much of Test cricket, barring maybe Bhuvaneshwar and now maybe Bumrah. These guys don't play a lot of Test cricket, these death over specialists. So I guess they need to keep playing a lot of T20 leagues, try out their variations, and then come out on top.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when he says that a lot of them don't play Test cricket, because obviously Sundararaman probably should be playing Test cricket. Jeetan Patel probably should. Syed Ajmal. So if you're looking at the guys with the lowest economy, you've got in the top 10, you've got Muhammad Amir, Ravi Ashwin, Mitchell Starc, and as I said, this is over the last since January 2014. So we're talking about the people who've done it a lot and are quite really good at it when it comes to economy rates. Those are all the players who are under 8 when it comes to an economy rate. So being a really good bowler helps, I think. But yeah, I think there is a lot of specialist skills, and there's also a lot of cricket, and I think Gaurav will tell you this. A lot of cricket is still done by the eye test. And I think what you see with a death bowler, and I think Dwayne Bravo is the perfect example of this. Dwayne Bravo will bowl an over that goes for 2 or 3 with a bunch of slower balls that no one can face, and he'll take a wicket and probably save a ball with an incredible bit of fielding off his own bowling, and everyone will call him this incredible death bowler. And he's bowled more at the death than anyone else, which on its own is incredible that he keeps stepping up in that section. But his overall economy rate is actually slightly above the average. Now, of course, he plays in the best competitions a lot of the time, and maybe doesn't pick up as many jobs in some of the smaller competitions. But regardless of that, he's not been a particularly incredible death bowler when you look at his record overall. The fact that he's managed to do it, so yet he is seen as a specialist. So I think maybe part of the problem is that what we've done, and this is right across the board in cricket, is T20 has brought in all these new numbers and all these stats, but the teams are still mostly being picked by owners and by coaches. And rather than maybe people like Gaurav, who should be picking the teams and having a look at who actually are the best, rather than just taking a guess based on someone's reputation.
Did teams listen to you at all when you were around?
No, again, it depends a lot on the person you're dealing with and the kind of management you have. And obviously, when I was around, it was just, especially with the IPL, it was just starting. This whole data was just starting up. And now I guess it's more scientific with more companies into the picture. So there are a lot of aspects also. It's all about perception, I believe, that if, and obviously on top of that, there should be successful case studies. So if I tell them, hey, pick Jeetan Patel in the IPL because he has an economy rate of 7.3 in the death, and then he comes and he does perform, then I'll be looked as if this whole model works and this is amazing. But if he gets tonked by 3 6s, his first game is against ABD, and he gets tonked for 3 6s, I look like a fool. So the problem is you need to balance both right now in cricket. You need to understand what the coaches believe, what the coaches want, and try to suggest based on what the team dynamics is, what kind of league are you picking for, who are the opposition batsmen, those aspects. So it should be a mix of both analytics and some amount of knowledge of the maybe subjective knowledge of the game in terms of conditions.
I would love to say that we're in a situation where that people are listening to Gaurav, but I think there are a lot of really good analysts out there, and there's just a lot of teams. I would say way more than 50% of all franchise teams do not have an analyst. And by analyst, I don't mean the person who logs the video and tells the coach where the ball was landed. I mean someone who looks at footage, who looks at numbers, who looks at ground sizes and all those sorts of things and comes up with proper plans. And I'd be shocked if 30% of T20 franchises have someone like that, and not even all international teams have them.
We'll just move on to our next section, which is a rapid fire quiz for Jarrod and Gaurav, which will be a feature of the show pretty much every episode. We'll have a question around the theme that we're centering the show around. In this case, it's death bowling. Jarrod and Gaurav, you have 30 seconds each. It's sort of a list in which you'll need to come up with as many names as you can. So I will start with Gaurav this time. And the question, Gaurav, for you is something that Jarrod's already mentioned, sadly. There are about 13 spin bowlers in T20 history who go at less than 8 and over at the death, which is over 16 to 20, the last 5 overs which we're considering. Spinners, as we discussed, don't tend to be given the ball too often. There are a few surprise names, but let's see how many that each of you can get, which would instantly win us the game, the hypothetical scenario, which we discussed earlier. Gaurav, your time starts in 3, 2, 1. Start.
Rashid Khan, Sunil Narayan. Obviously, he mentioned Jitan Patel, so I need to add that. R. Ashwin. Maybe Tahir, Imran Tahir, maybe. Aksar Patel. Who else? So maybe Shane Warne. Yeah, Brad Hogg. Shakib.
Okay, you have 2 seconds.
I can think of it.
Time, Gaurav. Time. Jarrod, can you do better? Your time starts in 3, 2, 1. Go.
Yeah, Rashid Khan, Sunil Narayan, Jeet Patel, Syed Ajmal, Ravi Ashwin, Brad Hogg. Trying to think of some others. Imran Tahir, Mohammad Nabi. Maybe might be up there as well. Shakib Al Hassan. Now I'm starting to struggle. Aksar Patel. What's his name? Sikandar Rana, the Zimbabwean. Raza. Sorry, yeah.
So yeah, it's about 9 guesses.
Neither of us said Murali, Gaurav.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the answers basically are, there are 2 Rashids in the top 3. There's Adil Rashid as well. Syed Ajmal. There's Rohan Mustafa from the UAE.
Oh, okay.
Jeetan Patel's there. There's your favorite Shahid Afridi, Jarrod.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Shoaib Malik. And the last guy on the list is Xavier Doherty.
Doherty's interesting then, just because you would have thought he would have been used a lot more at the death, and I don't think he has been. But
you think this is from the days of the Big Bash state tournament?
No, it could be from both for Doherty. But yeah, his name is not one that, like most of the others, once you've said them, makes sense. Adil Rashid, we both should have got as well. And even Afridi makes sense. And Malik, even though they've played less cricket, but Doherty is a bit of a surprise to me. And I always thought he was quite a good T20 bowler. He was one of the first T20 bowlers to have a stutter ball. And maybe one of the last T20 bowlers to have a stutter ball, where he used to come up to the crease and then just stop for a second before he bowled it, which I always thought was very cool.
It's a bit like taking the penalty a little late.
Yeah. It's like getting to the penalty kick and then holding yourself back a little bit. It's illegal in baseball, but it's not actually illegal in cricket, which is pretty lucky because Mohammad Hafiz kind of does it naturally. But with Doherty, it was very much on purpose, and he might have even done that when it was the Big Bash State League before it became the BBL. So he was very much an early innovator, Xavier Doherty. But I also remember the game where I think it was Kyron Pollard and Chris Gale in the World Cup World T20 semi-final. I think they hit him for 100 runs in one over. I could be wrong, but that's how I remember it.
Yeah, I do remember that as well as Rohit Sharma when he scored his double, though that was in the ODIs.
Any list that has Xavier Doherty and Murali on it is a good list.
So that's the quiz. The winner is Jarrod, who is a Saeed Ajmal's length of victory over Gaurav today. Just one answer more than Gaurav.
I think it's important to say that this is the second episode that we've ever recorded. We recorded another one, but the sound didn't quite work, so we're at it again. And it's important to note that I've now beaten Gaurav twice.
Absolutely. Jarrod's the man.
It just shows how sad my life is.
Into our next section, which is Mythbuster, where we are going to talk about one specific myth in T20 cricket and test it out for how true it is or how interesting it is to analysts and people on our show. So talking of death bowling, we're going to specifically dwell on the Yorkers and wide Yorkers and their efficacy in specific. Jarrod, I'm going to start with you. It seems a natural place to start because you've written a brief history of the Yorker in one long piece on Cricinfo. It's probably a year ago, was it?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a piece that everyone should read because it kind of starts off with a commentator talking about bowlers not bowling Yorkers consistently enough because they don't practice Yorkers enough. And bowlers seem to spend entire days now bowling at cones and improving their accuracy, hitting bullseye as often as they can. Death bowling is now a specialist skill, as we've already discussed. Jarrod, but like you say, batsmen have found ways to counter it by moving all around the crease, whereas cones really don't, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure after I wrote that piece, John Buchanan sent me an email and he said that he tested Glenn McGrath on accuracy. So Glenn McGrath is known as, certainly in modern cricket, one of the most accurate bowlers ever, but maybe even in the history of cricket. And when he actually looked into the accuracy of Glenn McGrath, it was, the old idea of he could hit a handkerchief just wasn't true. And it was it was a far bigger space that he could hit. He could hit within a few feet of width and length of where he wanted to, roughly over and over again. If your Yorker is 3 foot out or 2 foot out these days, you've got MS Dhoni being able to helicopter shot it. You've got all the batsmen now who play the scoops and the dill scoops off the ball that's not right. There's also batsmen who come forward in their crease and come back in their crease. The chances are that if you're 1 or 2 foot out, and that's if you're a great bowler like Glenn McGrath, you're going to go. So in the Yorker piece, McGrath only had one season in the IPL, but his one season in the IPL showed us that he was about successful at best every second Yorker he bowled. So if Glenn McGrath, who's that accurate, is only successful every second ball, and that was before really the dill scoop took over and those sorts of other shots took over, before the helicopter shot was as big as it is now, those sorts of things, essentially chances are that the Yorker is not going to be successful that much, and it is going to fail from time to time. And realistically, thinking that everything can be saved by the Yorker just doesn't make any sense.
Gaurav, we can sit here and argue about whether Yorkers are efficient or not, but from a team's perspective, is there a lot of grumble about commentators keeping on bagging bowlers for not bowling too many Yorkers? Because it clearly isn't as easy as we can just say it in a few words.
Yes, definitely. It is a very, very hard ball to bowl. Especially, I've spoken to a few fast bowlers and coaches as well who believe that it's very easy for people from outside to tell us to bowl Yorkers, but it's one of the hardest balls to execute in spite of how much you practice, because I guess a small amount of error, a small error in the line and length could cause a lot of damage, and a lot of times, which is why, interestingly, one of the stats which I pulled up a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago, is that the full toss actually is a very, very good delivery in the death in the T20 format, because a lot of wickets have fallen to the full toss, especially in the IPL. The reason could be them trying to bowl Yorkers and it ending up as a full toss, but the good good pace, and batsmen may be expecting a Yorker and not getting underneath the full toss as well as they have to. So, it's a double-edged sword, and not many people can execute those Yorkers well. If you can execute it to perfection, then I guess it's a good ball, which is something which I think anybody can make that statement. Only few bowlers can, and which is why a guy like Jasprit Bumrah is that good, because he's able to execute those Yorkers time and again at crunch situations, and he's able to repeat that again and again and again. So not many bowlers are able to do that. Malinga, obviously, with his action and with his accuracy of executing Yorkers, was the force he was. So it's a tough thing for young bowlers to come and just execute those Yorkers. How much ever you practice, the situation, the batsman, all these things come into the picture when the bowler's in his run-up. So yes, I believe Yorker is good. What I would like to see, guys, is people bowling the Yorkers more in the middle overs and in the first few overs as well. Not many bowlers do that. I don't know why. Maybe the new ball makes them do different things, crazy things, unlike the old ball. But I think I would like to see more people bowling the Yorkers, say, in 12th over or something like that.
Malinga is clearly the death bowling GOAT in the history of T20s, just about a decade and a half now. Jarrod, one of the stats that you mentioned in your piece is that a well-landed or a correctly landed Yorker goes for about 0.8 runs per ball, which is a good sort of return. But what doesn't often get counted is what happens when you get it wrong, which is more often than you get it right. Isn't that what made Malinga successful?
Yeah, essentially, it wasn't that he was much better. I think he was maybe in the top 10 of success rate when it came to bowling Yorkers. But the big difference was, for most bowlers, I think the overall economy rate on a full toss in T20 cricket is something like 11 runs off full tosses, 11 runs per over. Sorry, it's under 6 for a Yorker. But if you're bowling more full tosses, that's gonna still cost you a lot of runs. Where what Malinga was so amazing at is his Yorkers went for, I think, maybe 5 runs and over, or maybe even less than that. But his full tosses only went at about 7.5 runs and over. So his full tosses were better than most people's standard deliveries in T20 cricket, and that's because, all this nonsense, you should bowl more Yorkers because Malinga's successful at them. Malinga doesn't bowl like other people. He has a special action that is unlike anyone else's action. And because of the amount of drop that he puts on the ball, because he's almost bowling spin, so he undercuts the ball because of his action, and that made the ball drop. That was actually the problem that people had. Whether he was bowling spin or even when he was bowling seam, the ball never was quite at the length that batsmen expected it to be. So, Malinga is an incredible bowler, but other bowlers aren't going to be able to do that. The other thing is, it's easier to bowl Yorkers with a very low arm action. So the one thing that you can take from Malinga, talking to a young bowler now, what I'd be saying to them is, you should be working on a round arm ball for the death, because the lower you bowl the ball, science tells us, the more likely you are to get the ball in the block hole. For the actual chance of getting it wrong is far less. Tall bowlers, it's very hard for them to get Yorkers right in the block hole consistently. Obviously, Glenn McGrath and Joel Garner were incredible, but they were incredible because of their accuracy, not because of their actions. So realistically, I think what bowlers should be taking from Malinga is maybe looking at bowling the odd round ball, but no one's going to be successful as him again with that action. You would need another bowler with an incredible action, and I suppose the bowler that most has been like recently would be the Fizz, who yet again was basically bowling fast off spin at 135k an hour at the death, and yet again, not the easiest thing to replicate if you're a normal human being.
Gaurav, interesting point that Jarrod brings up, because these are guys who are supposed to be bowling fast, and instead it's their slower variations which are doing the trick. Just twisting this slightly, Rashid Khan is a guy who's supposed to be bowling slow. He's a leg spinner by trade, and yet it's his faster ones which are doing the trick. Do you think that's something that makes him successful at the death?
One great Indian bowler took 600 odd wickets bowling fast. So, spin bowler, that is. But yeah,
it's a great T20 bowler too, can be argued. No?
Yeah, definitely. So the fact is that, yeah, I guess anything different, anything which the batsman is not ready for will work. And it'll work for the period of time before batsmen tend to find a solution for that. And the bowlers need to improvise again and again. Like you see the knuckle ball, you see with the off cutter, you see the leg cutter or whatever. Back of the hand slow ball was a big thing when James Faulkner used to do it successfully. Now the James Faulkner's back of the hand slow ball possibly must be the with the worst economy rate. So it's a very, very tricky thing for bowlers. Unlike batsmen, bowlers need to constantly innovate, come up with new ways of bowling balls, and whether it's a quicker one, slower one, sidearm, around the wicket, over the wicket, angle, lot of things. And the guys who tend to do that more, they're likely to be more successful.
Jarrod, one last question before we head to our final section. You mentioned about bowlers landing it on a handkerchief's length and Nasser Hussain insisting about it, Chris Jordan being successful at bowling Yorkers because he's so good at hitting the stumps and so often. Do you think with batsmen moving around the crease and kind of evolving and getting used to these things, teams, are they starting to devise newer training methods? For example, one thing we see in football is a penalty with a moving pole that keeps moving around the goal post area, and players have to ensure they hit the target all the time. Do you see those sorts of training regimes coming into play in T20s?
I've seen a little bit of it, not a lot, but I think teams are definitely thinking about it. I know a lot of teams in England are. I haven't seen the IPL teams train as much. I saw a little bit of the Big Bash. They're thinking about it. I think that there's a lot of different parts to this. In baseball, there's what a lot of batters do before they go out in baseball is actually look at all the different variations that the pitcher can do, and they're looking for little tells on them. Cricket doesn't do that yet. That's going to be the next big move in cricket. But also on top of that, then bowlers are going to start looking at. I've noticed a bowler, a few bowlers do this actually, where they basically the ball that they bowl is a complete reaction to the ball that was bowled before them. And the problem with that is that is how cricket works. So we now know that, Don Bradman, he didn't have incredible eyesight, and yet he was still able to tell what the next ball was. That's because he would read the field, the match situation, and the bowler before the ball had even been released. We don't have time to read the ball once it's been released at 85, 90 miles an hour. That's not how our brains are just not equipped for that. Yet batsmen are still playing them. So that tells us something quite interesting, because I think part of the problem is that batsmen are getting very good at just reading what the next ball is. And I noticed that with Tymal Mills quite a bit in the Big Bash. It wasn't that he wasn't bowling particularly good balls, because he bowled a lot of good balls. It was like the batsmen were one step ahead of him. And I think the bowlers now need to think about their planning and what goes into being a very good death bowler.
Now we finally head into the standoff, where we pose a question for both our guests to debate on. In this case, we've talked about Rashid, we've spoken about Malinga and Sundararaman, all the great death bowlers in modern times at T20s. We're asking a question to Jarrod and Gaurav to pick any bowler or any all-time great from cricket's history who they think would have been a great death bowler. Somebody who would nearly have been a mythical bowler to kind of score against and who'd keep picking wickets at will. Okay. We'll start with Jarrod, who has exactly 60 seconds to make the case for an all-time great now.
I have this narrowed down between Joel Garner and Sid Barnes. I love Joel Garner. I think he's massively underrated, weirdly. I think he's probably one of the great early limited overs players. But I'm going to go with Sid Barnes. And the reason I'm going to go with Sid Barnes is it's something that you kind of said earlier, Srinath, where basically Sid Barnes had the ability to bowl fast and he had the ability to bowl spin. So he basically was like a modern change-up bowler, sort of like a Ben Lachlan or a Dwayne Bravo, but he was just better. He was better than them. He was incredible. And I think the only bowler we've ever seen close to that is Mustafizur Rahman until his elbow went. And I think we saw how brilliant he was at the death. And I think Sid Barnes would have been even better. I think he would have been near on unplayable. He was accurate. He was fast, and he could spin the ball both ways. I think, at the death, forget about it. I don't know how anyone would have faced Sid Barnes.
The one question, Jarrod, which keeps getting leveled against someone like Sid Barnes and pretty much anyone in that era, is that they played against two teams and they were uncovered wickets and whatnot. So I'm just posing the classic Lionel Messi conundrum, which English writers often do. Can he do it on a hot 45-degree day in Indore against AB de Villiers?
Well, being that he was one of the faster bowlers of his era and that he was a spinner, if you're on a hot day in Indore and the pitch is giving you any seam movement at all, or any spin in that case at all, he'd be good. He'd be good anywhere. I think the fact that he was good on uncovered pitches doesn't change anything. As I said, the only bowler I've seen similar to him is ever really successfully at the top level of cricket is the Fizz. And I think we know that the Fizz was pretty good. I think Sid Barnes was a better bowler than the Fizz, and I think that he would be an incredible bowler. But yeah, I mean, you're asking us to take players from another era, so unfortunately that is part of the game. But with Sid Barnes, I'm more than I would pick him now. I don't know where his corpse is currently, but if I can reanimate his corpse now, I'd probably get him, maybe not an IPL contract, but certainly a decent CPL gig.
He'd be as good as Kyle Nipper, surely.
He wouldn't be as good as Kyle Nipper, but he would be better than Kyle Abbott.
Gaurav, are you going for somebody that we watched, or are you having a player like Jarrod chosen from a completely different era before our times?
I'm going for someone whom I've seen, and I'm going to go with Wasim Akram purely because he used to execute those Yorkers extremely well. He has a lot of deliveries. Yes, maybe the slower one was something which he didn't have. He didn't need to bowl so much during his days, but I think Wasim Akram is my man for the death, and in tough conditions where you need to constantly bowl those good Yorkers. I don't remember people scoring 20, 25 runs. Yes, I know it was a different era, but I don't think it's going to be easy scoring 20 odd runs of Wasim Akram, even without fielders for that matter. It's a hard. He's a great bowler. He's a great exponent of swing bowling, and all kinds of swing for that matter. And yes, so Wasim is my man.
I think Wasim's a really good pick, but it is interesting that he had a decent slow ball, but how good his slow ball would be now. But the other big weapon that he had was reverse swing, which he just can't get as much of in T20 cricket. So it would be interesting to see how he would go now, but he'd still be. I would think he'd still be one of the higher ranked death bowlers if he played right now for sure, and also, you know, decent hitter as well if you needed it, especially against spin.
Jarrod, it's interesting you mentioned that because in the first ever T20 game, I think it was Hampshire sent Wasim Akram to bat at number 3 as a pinch hitter, if I'm right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, by then he was probably a bit beyond his best batting, but I think, you know, in his glory days, he's the sort of guy that, you know, in those middle overs between, 7 and 12, when you know you're going to face a lot of spin, so you send him out, and at the very least, the opposition has to change their tactics and which bowlers that they use. And, he's got a test double 100, so he's handy.
Any particular reason, Jarrod, why Sid Barnes is your man over somebody like Wasim Akram? Akram could bowl 6 different balls, as they say, every over. He had all the variations. Any particular reasons?
Well, Sid Barnes had more variation than any bowler ever. I mean, Sid Barnes was a spinner and a seam bowler. We still have never had a successful combination of those two since Sid Barnes. So, the fact that Sid Barnes would say he was a spinner and yet also had a bouncer tells you that he probably had a lot more than 6 deliveries he had. And that was in an era where there weren't that many deliveries around.
Jarrod, that's not fair to Anil Kumble, as Gaurav mentioned.
It is fair because no one ever said Anil Kumble is a seam bowler. What they said is he could bowl spinner a little bit faster than other spinners. Whereas Sid Barnes, people would call him a seam bowler, and yet when they faced him, they would say he was a spinner. That's a completely different kind of bowler. And there was other hybrid bowlers a bit like him, I think, in his era. But I think if you look at the realistic, a realistic way, Sid Barnes was, even all those other bowlers who bowled in that era, still very few of them had records anywhere near as good as Sid Barnes. And the very best batsmen in the world, whether it be Aubrey Faulkner or Victor Trumper and the guys who faced him, they said he was just on a complete another level. So for me, he was one of the first bowlers ever with 6 or 7 different kind of deliveries, way before that sort of became a thing in the 90s. And he also could bowl up or bowl down. So I would think a bowler like that allows you to go into a team, a bit like, and Garfield Sobers is another interesting one when it comes to T20 cricket. If you've got a bowler who can legitimately bowl seam up and be really good at it, and then switch and bowl legitimate spin and be really good at it, that gives you a lot more flexibility as well. So for me, Sid Barnes, I don't know why we're arguing about this. It's obviously Sid Barnes.
Gaurav, you have any argument against that? Any reasons why you went for Wasim Akram over a mythical beast that Sid Barnes seems to be?
No, it's purely because I've seen him, and he was a great exponent of reverse swing and bowling the Yorkers, one of the best. And we've seen so many good batsmen getting out. And trust me, those days people were not as attacking as what they are today. So imagine if I think he's not a bowler whom you can attack so easily. So if you are looking to attack him, he's only going to get more wickets. So that's why I was seeing.
And that is all we have time for in the first episode of Talking T20. We will, of course, be on ESPN Cricinfo, where through the course of the IPL, we'll put out an episode roughly every week to discuss the goings-on and the trends that shape the tournament, and, of course, regularly beyond that as well. You can also subscribe to us on iTunes, leave us a rating, and share your comments and feedback on this podcast. We will be back very soon with a new episode of Talking T20. Until then, it's goodbye from all of us here.